looked, and the fact that the ADC who walked behind him would generally carry a comb so that when Lord Louis stepped out of a plane or a car, he could see that his hair was in place. And in sharp contrast, she never really cared how she looked. She didn't care whether her hair looked right or whether her makeup was all right or not. And very often friends of hers who came out from England would say, well, she's only got 2 dresses, it seems to me. Don't you think you ought to have a few more? And she never cared about that sort of thing. And that, too, was very endearing.
I think Mountbatten's personal glory was probably never very far from his mind. He brought out with him 2 young women whose sole job was to cut out and paste into enormous portfolios all the pictures and references to him that appeared in the Indian press. And I would guess that now at Rumsey is the best documented life of anybody who's ever lived in this country. I don't know, but I would think that there is a beautifully and completely documented life of Mountbatten. Had he chosen to go on the stage, he would have outshone Laurence Olivier.
I could see that everything was going to depend upon personal relationships. If I could build up an atmosphere of trust and understanding with the key figures, I might succeed. If I couldn't do that, I knew I hadn't got a hope. And of course, all this had to be done in such a way that none of them could think that the others were being privileged or getting away with backstairs methods.
Most lacking in trust was Jinnah. He had won the support of the Muslims with a simple battle cry, Pakistan, a separate Muslim state. But it hardly looked a practical idea. The League was asking for 4 provinces in the northwest and 2 in the east, which would make a Pakistan suspended in 2 halves, with almost nothing in common and 800 miles of India in between. Jinnah refused to discuss these drawbacks to Pakistan, or any matters that might have caused divisions within the Muslim League. He was used to being in control, and before meeting Mountbatten, he prepared himself with care.
It was generally regarded that Jinnah was a remote and rather cold personality. And before the meeting took place, we went out into the garden for a official photograph, and Jinnah did his very best to be charming. He stood with Lord and Lady Louis, the idea being, of course, that Lady Louis would be in the middle, and Mr. Jinnah and Mountbatten on both sides. And Jinnah made his first effort at a charming remark, saying that she was a rose between 2 thorns. Unfortunately, he was in the middle.
What did he say to you after his first meeting with Jinnah?
Well, he said, by God, he is cold. Which he was. Jinnah was a very remote, very austere figure. And I don't think he was going to be charmed in quite the same way as some of the other leaders were.
Jinnah had few friends. No one knew him well. And he kept one secret that might have changed history. In early 1947, Jinnah learned his life was nearly over. He had incurable TB. Had Congress or the British known, they would have redoubled their efforts to keep India united. Gandhi, above all, hated the idea of partition. Without Jinnah, he would have vetoed it. He could still cause trouble.
When he started calling Edwina and me his dear friends, I began to have the feeling that we were halfway home.
It was characteristic of Gandhi that at our very next meeting, the next day in fact, he proposed, as a solution to India's problems, that I should ask Jinnah to form an administration. He really meant it, even though he must have realized that this meant giving the Muslims virtual control. Anything rather than see India divided or have a civil war. Of course, it was quite impractical. I told him he must first get the support of the Congress Party, and this he naturally failed to get. But that was Gandhi. Nehru was already a friend, of course. My first meeting with him had been almost exactly a year before, when he visited Singapore, whilst I was still Supreme Commander, Southeast Asia.
He knew now that he would get a fair deal from me. With Nehru, the trust I was trying to build up with the leaders was already there, and more than trust, friendship. It was not only between him and me, but with Edwina and my daughters Patricia and Pamela too. He believed that our whole family loved India and would try and do what was right for India.
You see, my father was rather starved. When you have a rather rich personality, a many-sided personality, you need a number of different relationships in order to feel fully alive. And I think that he was missing that type of conversation earlier, which he got with the Mountbattens, and a closer touch with the newer ideas of the Western world.
Mountbatten had the great merit of perceiving from the outset and sticking firmly to it, perceiving at the outset that he must keep Nehru on his side. He perceived that and never lost sight of it. And that was partly the secret of his success.
It's not a terrible thing for me to say. My brother's colleagues, for many years being men who were identified in spirit, loyalty, love, spoke a different language. And here was this Englishman who was closer to him, vis-a-vis the background, and a very sophisticated and clever man who knew just how far to go with Nehru.
Nehru led Congress, the government in waiting. The problem was Jinnah. The state of Pakistan that he had led the Muslims to demand would include millions of Hindus and Sikhs. The province of Bengal was slightly more than half Muslim, but it was almost half non-Muslim, and its capital, Calcutta, was the largest Hindu city in India. The Punjab was similar, half Muslim, but containing millions of Sikhs, who defiantly launched their own claim for a state. And in the rest of India, another 40 million Muslims were scattered. If Jinnah's Pakistan was created, they would be left out.
He argued there must be partition. Otherwise, as a minority community, the Muslims would be swamped in Hindu India. Right, I said. Then by the same argument, the two provinces you want in Pakistan with large non-Muslim minorities will also have to be partitioned. Oh no, you can't do that. Punjabi unity and Bengali unity are much more important than Hindu-Muslim differences. In that case, I said, surely Indian unity is much more important than Hindu-Muslim differences. Oh no, said Jinnah, we must have Pakistan. And so it went on. A circular argument, round and round the mulberry bush. I never met anybody who could say no so persistently and so effectively.
Jinnah was now the prisoner of his own propaganda. He could not withdraw the Pakistan demand or persuade the British to give it to him in full.
He had to wait till the moment when the time came for the real distribution of power. He wouldn't like to disclose his hand beforehand because that would expose him. He wouldn't like to overcall because the bluff could always be exposed. So he had to wait till the decisive moment. And I think that was the correct strategy as far as I see, as a student of politics also, and as one who has happened to work with him. That was the correct strategy at the time, to wait till the last minute. Because the British we were not sure about the British also.
When they would leave?
When they would leave. And naturally, when they decided to leave, then he disclosed his hand.
Even before Mountbatten arrived, Congress leaders, except Gandhi, had accepted partition. Congress were desperate to secure an effective government in Delhi. But if a united India included Jinnah, it looked increasingly ungovernable. They called Jinnah's bluff and agreed to Pakistan.
What else could be done? You see, when you get gangrene in your leg, you have to cut it off, isn't it? If you allow it to remain, the whole body gets gangrene.
Congress feared a civil war. The leaders were worried that Britain might delay independence until no governable India was left for anyone to take over.
They're getting on, you see. And none of them young men. I was young, so I could take a different view, younger than them. But they probably felt this was it. How long were they going to be in the wilderness? Not everyone likes being in the wilderness. I think they had enough. They want to settle for what was possible.
Nehru wanted a strong India. To get it, a partition that removed some Muslim areas was necessary. It was a price he was reluctantly prepared to pay.
Oh, very reluctant. There was no acceptance in any sense of the word as something that was right. It was just something that had to be, and well, let's make it as good as we can.
Gandhi, the father figure of Congress, had always opposed any partition of India. Now, in June 1947, he chose to remain silent and say nothing.
He began to realize that he was not at the center of at this moment in time, of the Congress negotiating position. And so, being a master of symbolism, which he always was, he used his realization of this when he saw Mountbatten at a key moment in the negotiations, to say to him that this is my day of silence. And on his day of silence, he had to write notes. He didn't say anything. He wrote it on the back of an envelope that Mountbatten would realize that he, Gandhi, today could say nothing because it was his day of silence. That was his, if you like, symbolic way of saying that he was no longer going to take a veto position or a central position in the discussion.
Gandhi, who had repeatedly frustrated British policy by well-publicized fasts unto death, now chose not to protest.
Gandhi pushed himself aside. He had asserted himself in moments when he wanted to. Why did he at that time not stand up and say, kill me, and then take Pakistan? He didn't.
Mountbatten's award followed the plan Congress had already outlined. Jinnah was given Pakistan, but it was much smaller than he had demanded. Instead of the whole of Bengal, he would get the Muslim area only. And in the Punjab, he would receive only the West. Jinnah had called this a truncated and moth-eaten Pakistan. He had said he would never accept it. Now, in the closing days of the Raj, would Jinnah fight on or give in?
The meetings with Jinnah were very difficult on these matters. He was legalistic, he was formal. And on one occasion, during one of these discussions, when Mountbatten thought he was carrying him with him, Jinnah said, "No, Your Excellency," he said, "I can't agree, but I accept." So Mountbatten said, "Well, Mr. Jinnah, you're playing with words. It is a serious matter, and I really can't follow that kind of distinction." But he left it at that. Came the day of the actual key meeting, the meeting of the leaders for, in effect, passing a fifth of the human race into a new order, a very great moment. Mountbatten opened the proceedings to say that this was a very great moment in history. The leaders were now assembled for this great responsibility. He said, "I think we have reached a moment," and he looked at Mr. Jinnah. He said, "not where we will all agree, but where we must all accept what is going to happen." Jinnah nodded his head and said, "Today, agreement is accepted."
I must say that I feel the Viceroy has battled against various forces very bravely. And the impression that he has left on my mind is he was actuated by a high sense of fairness and impartiality. And it is up to us to make his task less difficult.
But behind Jinnah's diplomatic language lay a crushing defeat. Mountbatten and Congress had kept Pakistan to a bare minimum.
We have therefore decided to accept these proposals. It is with no joy in my heart that I commend these proposals to you, though I have no doubt in my mind that this is the right course. The proposal to allow certain parts to secede is painful for any of us to contemplate. Nevertheless, I am convinced that our present decision is the right one. We are little men serving great causes, but because the cause is great, something of that greatness falls upon us also. Mighty forces are at work in the world today and in India, and I have no doubt that we are ushering in a period of greatness for India.
By June 1947, all parties had agreed on partition. But every day the slaughter between Muslims and Hindus was getting worse. Bengal in the east was now the flashpoint. To prevent further killings, Gandhi went on a fast to death.
During his fast, processions marched through the city with the people shouting, "Let Gandhi break his fast." And although the disturbances lasted for some time, the miracle, as many Indians describe it, was eventually accomplished. After about 73 hours, the city was reported as quiet and Gandhi ended his fast.
Mountbatten feared that if he stayed the full year, a raging civil war would break out. The Raj, he decided, must be ended fast. With little ceremony for once, Mountbatten announced that Britain was about to leave, and a year earlier than promised.
It was extremely well stage managed, and there was this great number of foreign correspondents from all over the world. And when somebody asked about the date of handing over, because that time, as you know, the whole idea was that June 48 was going to be. And so everybody was working roughly on that assumption. And he said 14th, 15th August. And there was a pin drop silence, pin drop silence. And everybody thought that he has not correctly what he'd forgotten. And after that he turned round and he said, that is all what you wanted, freedom quickly, independence quickly, I've given it to you.
Partition was now to be in 7 weeks, not 12 months. Sir Cyril Radcliffe arrived in Delhi. He sat poring over outdated maps and population data. He had to decide the partition line in the two provinces, Punjab and Bengal. Radcliffe had just 37 days.
It was so childish. You had a calendar and you took a page out and you were dividing a subcontinent, or I should say continent. This continent is bigger than that of Europe. And there it was.
For Radcliffe, the partition of Bengal between Muslims and Hindus was difficult enough. But it was the other partition, the Punjab, that was the greater problem. There, the Muslims and Sikhs were hopelessly intermixed. Their crops depended on irrigation by canal. If the boundary cut a canal, the enemy controlled the lifeline. The killing now reached fever pitch. Muslims in East Punjab began moving out of India to the safety of their future homeland, Pakistan. In the west of the province, the Sikhs, fearful of being trapped in the Muslim states-to-be, headed east to India.
For once, Mountbatten had slipped up. He himself had underestimated the appalling consequences of partition in the north. He didn't realize that the Sikhs would fight as they did, and what appalling massacres would occur between the two communities.
As each side began a mass slaughter of the other, Sikhs headed for Amritsar with its golden temple, the holy shrine of the Sikhs. The killing in North India, which was to overshadow the first months of independence, had begun.
And twice to Lord Mountbatten I told that we fear that the Sikhs are organizing a planned violence in the parts in which they are in a majority, and that we apprehend very grave consequences, to which Lord Mountbatten said, I should not bother about it for a second. They will have the situation completely in control. That need not trouble me in the least.
Millions were on the move. Every family desperate to be on the right side of the boundary line. Whether on foot or crammed into trains or buses, the refugees were easy prey to armed bands from the other side. The killing went on till November 1947.
I was reporting for the BBC, and I had a microphone and a small portable recorder, and I remember that I had a jeep going up, and again and again I used to seeing these massacres taking place, certainly on the Grand Trunk Road itself, where people tried to cut people down. I'd lift up the microphone and said, the BBC is watching you, BBC watching you, and they'd stop. The extraordinary thing was, in the middle of all these scenes, nobody for a moment touched me or any European. We were the untouchables. They'd left nice and far away.
I remember one afternoon there was a convoy which came across from Firozpur in India, and these refugees were in a very miserable condition. It was not uncommon to find as many as 200 or 300 men, women and children coming along stark naked without a stitch of clothing on them. They were horribly mutilated, maimed. Some of them had broken limbs. The women had their breasts cut off. There were children carrying dead children just for the sake of burying them in the soil of Pakistan. And all told, it was not a very pretty sight, I can assure you.
Lady Mountbatten has been paying visits to refugee camps and listening to many fearful stories of the fighting. At Jalandhar and Amritsar, for example, thousands of refugees told her of their appalling experiences. As if the massacres were not enough, floods have added to the terrible tribulations of the people of the Punjab. The heavy rains have swollen the river Ravi, and many refugees have been stranded, unable to cross to safety. Some food has been dropped by air, but the tragedy is on too big a scale for such a solution. There is little safety even in travel by railway, for many trains have been attacked and the passengers killed.
The trains ran a serious risk. They had to water the engine, and they were Anglo-Indian drivers who shunt the train into a siding, go off to water the engines. That gave the Sikh bands a chance. They'd come in and they'd go right through the train and kill everybody. The train would then shunt onto Lahore, where in the siding they'd have to take the dead out, and they were a terrible sight. I don't go into details, but you can imagine. And you could almost see them coming with the fly swarms around them. And when the bodies were taken out and laid down, and there would be about 2,000 at a time. I never forget one station official turning to me, who'd obviously used to order. The pride of British India was the railways. It was a tremendous system. And he looked at that and he said to me, in a voice I'll never forget, "Sir, it is hardly worth issuing tickets anymore." A good man, horrified by the collapse of water.
And next door was the Walton railway station. We were taking these trains there because otherwise people were getting worked up in Lahore. And there you saw bodies of women, bloated bodies of women, some sucking their babies, and these lances strike through the babies and the mothers. Bloated bodies, pulling them out, you couldn't sort of get to those compartments. Number one, on account of the smell that was there. And then to look at those bodies, you just, no human being could stand the sight of women in such conditions, cut up and badly raped and badly handled.
I saw a railway station in Amritsar where I had gone to receive somebody that the local people got hold of a boy, and when his pants were taken off, he was found to be circumcised, and they said, "You are a Muslim." And he begged of them that he was not Muslim. His mother cried and she said, "We are Hindu and he is not a Muslim boy." But because of the circumcision, he was killed right in the railway station.
Our parents, they made us together in one room, locked us in one room, and brought kerosene oil for us there in that room. And they said, whenever there is any raid, we will burn you up there. And even we girls, we were prepared for that.
You were prepared to be burnt up rather than fall in the hands of the Muslims?
Yes, we preferred death to disgrace at that time. My own sister-in-law, she was stabbed there by her own husband because she was being removed by the Muslim people. So he just killed her there, right in our own house.
In Walpur, where I was, most of the Sikhs in villages left of their own accord before anything had happened, very wisely. But once this turmoil had started, any Sikh in Walpur, I ultimately said to myself, he's a dead man unless he's under my direct eye.
As I looked at each day's new results of communal discord, I realized that in their present mood, the religious groups were just not going to be able to live together. They were tearing their country to pieces.
Mountbatten made only 2 visits to the riot areas. His priority was to get out before British prestige collapsed entirely amid the slaughter.
I think that this was the only big mistake he made. I think that otherwise he was pretty well informed that he was. The important thing was that he did realize that we had to keep to a very rapid timetable if we were going to be able to leave India in peace and without a complete breakdown of the administration.
In July, Mountbatten set up a Punjab boundary force to police the future dividing line. It had an impossible job. Its 55,000 soldiers could not cover hundreds of miles of countryside. Reduced to virtual spectators, its British officers could only send Mountbatten daily situation reports as the killings went on.
20th of June 1947. Since last report there have been 14 killed, 50 injured, 38 fires and 3 bomb explosions. Report number 697, 14th of July 1947. A bomb exploded outside a Sikh canteen and there was immediately a free fight. 8 persons were killed and 35 injured. 8th of August 1947. Amritsar and Lahore cities continued to give trouble, daily casualties running at between 50 and 100. Report number 704, 13th of August 1947. The Muslims in Amritsar district have hit back and in a village named Jalalabad have eliminated a local Hindu minority, killing probably over 70 people.
Situation reports which were made up and sent in quintuplicates. One copy went to the cabinet, I know. 2 or 3 copies were retained in India, and one always heard went to Churchill. But these sit reps went in every day with an assessment of casualties and were made up from reports from all over this very large area. It is true that they were difficult to assess,